So I hope you guys are doing well and, getting out there and doing some creative stuff. I want to talk to you about a couple of photographs, actually. I'm going to start with, actually, I'm not going to start with this first one, but I will come back to it in a minute. This is an interesting photograph that I took of Annie Leibovitz. Let's start here. Who knows the photographer? Pop quiz. Who can name this photographer? This is a very famous photograph. I'll give you guys a minute to answer that question. What is really remarkable about this photograph is how it was captured. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. I'm still waiting for an answer. If you guys know who this is, no fair Googling. You should know this. You should know this photographer right away. Yeah. Christopher Wins, Dorothea Lange. Okay, what's really amazing about this photograph, and we use this as an example of cameras do not take photographs, people do. Now, I want you to imagine this woman and these two children a few feet away from her. How far do you think that is? Like 6 feet. Now, she's not using an iPhone. She's not using a 35 millimeter camera that's about this big. She's using a 4x5 like this. It actually isn't this camera. She had a Graflex, I think. But look at how big this is. And look at how, while she's shooting it, this big behemoth thing is right in front of her. And she probably had the back open like this. Actually, she probably sighted it through, I don't have one on this camera, but a viewfinder. If it's a Graflex, you would do it this way. You wouldn't look through the back. I mean, in this camera, you would be looking through the back like this, but she's probably not doing that. But she's capturing that emotion and that expression and what the kids are doing 6 feet away with this camera like this. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. We talk about street photography and going out and maybe trying to be unobtrusive. There's nothing unobtrusive about this 4x5. Now, how do you pull that off? How do you pull that off? The camera itself is a huge barrier between you and your subject. And you're trying to not intervene and erase that emotion. Look at the frown on her face and the distress and what the kids are doing. So she essentially made herself invisible. But how do you do that? There's only one answer, you guys. You, as the photographer, you are in communication with your subject to such an extent that the subject is no longer worried or concerned about the camera. And that's a people skill. That's not a camera skill. It's a very well exposed negative, but this camera has how many controls on it? It's got focus. We've got aperture. This is kind of cool because the shutter is built into the lens, right? So you actually control the shutter and the aperture right from the lens. But that's it. We focus, in this case, by using this bellows thing. Okay, so you have 3 controls. This isn't about the camera. This is about Dorothea Lange being there to such an extent that the woman trusted her to open up the emotional, take the curtain away, and just see what's really going on here. Remarkable photograph. And there's so much to be learned from this one image. It comes back to this little phrase of cameras do not take photographs. People do. And all our fixation and worry about what gear we have and do I have the right lens and blah, 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 blah. Think about Dorothea Lange running around with her Graflex. Okay? Lesson to be learned. Okay, let's look at another image here. if I can find my preview, I've got so much stuff going on this. Here we go. So Bob Holmes, a remarkable photograph taken in Burma. Another example of, I believe this was, a color slide film. I don't actually know. I should ask him. I don't think it's digital. It looks to me like Kodachrome. Another example of Bob capturing this photograph without distracting the subject. This guy is going about his business in prayer. Bob had to be respectful of that. This is obviously a religious rite, or it's obviously a prayer on the candles. And here's Bob capturing this without intruding upon the subject. This is a skill. This is another people skill. Bob's famous phrase is, you have to know your camera well enough so it doesn't get in the way of your photography. Remember that. Super important. You have to know it well enough so you're never fumbling. You're not like, oh, how should I expose this? He also says you have to know what your camera sees, not what your eye sees. And not only do you know what his camera sees, but how does that film capture? What is the film going to do when it captures that image? This is why you got to know your camera like a close friend. Another great image from Bob, Taj Mahal, and he had to wait for that gesture. This is an example of composition using gesture. And being patient is another skill as a photographer. None of these things have anything to do with the camera. It's all about you as an artist using this tool. And I'm just saying this to underscore our modern, if you don't have the latest doodad, whatever it is, you can't take a good photograph. Bah, humbug, balderdash. Another, amazing image from Bob. And hopefully you've seen our show where he talks about the first woman came along and he snapped that one, and second woman, and third, and he thought he had it. And then the final woman came out with that amazing red shirt on, and it just made the whole image pop. Remarkable. And there's so much to learn about composition in this photograph. The diagonal lines give it a feeling of vitality. Notice their feet are up, which also gives that feeling of forward motion. Again, this is a combination of being patient and also knowing when you have it, and you get the decisive moment, and you don't fiddle with your camera. You are right there, being in tune with the people, with your subject. Again, it's not the camera. He could have captured this with practically any camera. And then finally, this one, I'm going to tell you a story. This is Annie Leibovitz, who I went to the San Francisco Art Institute with. And I was on a tour of her exhibit in San Francisco. This is a funny story, you guys. This has multiple layers to this story. So I had a film crew there that was filming me. This was the very, very, very first ever Advancing Your Photography show. Ever. I started with Annie Leibovitz. How about that? And we toured her gallery, her exhibit in San Francisco. And I was getting ready with my team and getting their equipment set up and myself set up and whatnot. And then I thought, okay, I got to get my camera because I want to shoot some pictures as we're going through this thing. At that time, I had the state of the art was a Nikon D2X rather. A good camera at that time. That was pretty cool. So I get my camera out and I go, oh, there's no battery in it. Oh, no big deal. I got batteries. I got spares, So, oh, it's in my car. So I go out to my car. There's no battery. There's no spare battery. All of a sudden, I flashed that I left the batteries on the charger back in the studio. Oops. You can't do much with a digital camera and no battery. Big liability to our digital age. So I have no camera. So I grab a friend of mine is going through this shoot. He had a Canon 5D Mark II, which I'd never used before. Now I use them, 5D 2 and 3 and whatever 4. I never used one before, never held a Canon. On top of that, I have to wear reading glasses to see the dials. I didn't have my reading glasses. And on top of that, if these challenges weren't enough, there was no room left on his card. But he did say, look, you could probably delete these two here. And he deleted 2 of the images. So I had two shots. I can't read the dials. I don't know the dials anyway, even if I could read them, because it's a Canon and it's like everything seemed foreign to me. But somehow I figured it out. And I got right up there with Annie and boom, captured this photograph. Again, it's not the camera. I proved that it was not the camera. It's a moment of, she's telling this story about shooting the cover of Vanity Fair with Demi Moore, who is pregnant. So that has a number of lessons. Number one, don't leave your equipment behind. I created a equipment checklist as a result of that. And I always double check gear because it's so easy, and this, especially because this wasn't my primary purpose. The primary purpose was to video her. And we did have all our video stuff together. But you got to not leave essential gear behind. Got to have a checklist. Also, it helps to be familiar with your equipment, which I wasn't. And by just sure, like, I'm going to get this photograph. And, in those days, I might have had an iPhone. I can't remember. I might have had an iPhone 1, but I wouldn't have used it, for this kind of photograph. Anyway, there's my little story. Got a couple of things to remember. It's not about the gear. It's about you as a photographer being there as a photographer, capturing your subject, and letting them be themselves. Whatever emotion that is, that's what you're trying to capture. Please subscribe and enable the bell so you don't miss any of our new shows. Like the video and please share it and leave your comments. I love hearing from you. And remember to get out and capture your own images of life.